So you want to know the ins and outs of managing your money. Well, lucky for you, you're just in time for another episode of Master Your Finances with certified financial planner professional Kurt Baker. Kurt and his panel of experts are here for you and will cover topics from a legal and personal standpoint. They'll discuss tax efficiency, liability, owning, managing, and saving your money, and more. Master Your Finances is underwritten in part by Certified Wealth Management and Investment and Rider University. Rider offers continuing studies programs for adults who need flexibility. Want to add new skills to your resume? Take a continuing studies course at Rider University. Now, let's learn how we can better change our habits with Kurt Baker.
Good morning and welcome back to another edition of Master Your Finances presented by Certified Wealth Management and Investment. I am Kurt Baker, a certified financial planner professional located in Princeton, New Jersey. I can be reached through our website, which is www.cwmi.us, or you can call me directly at 609-716-4700. This week, very pleased to have with us Chris French, the CEO of Geomatics. He co-founded Geomatics LLC as an outgrowth of his successful 4 decades experience serving the public and private sectors in natural resource management and environmental cleanup of hazardous waste sites. As CEO of Geomatics, Mr. French is responsible for overall operations, technology deployment, business development, and decision-making on strategy. Also acts as the principal liaison to the ownership team. Mr. French earned a BA in geology from Amherst College and an MS in environmental science, as well as a professional certification in geomatics and remote sensing from Rutgers University Center for the Remote Sensing and Spatial Analytics. Mr. French is a California registered geologist and certified engineering geologist and a Six Sigma Green Belt certified. Wow. That's fantastic, Chris. I really appreciate you coming on. I know we met at the Chamber just a few weeks back, and I thought this was kind of an interesting area from a lot of perspectives. One is this is kind of a new area, so to speak. I mean, we hear about all these areas where things like drones are going to start coming into our lives, or hear about, Mr. Bezos is going to send them to our house and I guess land on the roof and drop packages off or something. I don't know. They're becoming an interesting thing from a lot of perspectives, right? And we're talking about rules of the road, just like airplanes. There was nothing in the beginning, and now we've got this whole development. So I'm just a little curious about, I know your background is a little bit of an environmental area. So what kind of triggered this whole idea of starting this business in the beginning, if you don't mind kind of walking us through that whole process?
Yeah, well, it all started for me back in high school many decades ago when I volunteered at the U.S. Geological Survey, and they taught me how to interpret geology from aerial photographs. And I ended up doing an internship in college with the branch of petrophysics and remote sensing, where we were using the very earliest satellite sensor technologies to map gold deposits. And the theory behind it is that every material on Earth, be it soil or water or algae or minerals or trees, has certain spectra that it either absorbs or reflects. And you have these special sensors that can measure that. And you can slice those spectra and dice them, add them, multiply them, divide them, subtract them, and tease out a lot of extremely valuable information. So fast forward for almost 40 years, and what we have now is this incredible convergence of these new drone-based flight platforms, the miniaturization of sensors that used to fit on airplanes and now fit in your hand under a drone, and then these incredibly powerful desktop computers. I used to use a mainframe at the USGS, and also these wonderful new visualization technologies, as well as machine learning and AI. And what has happened is in 2016, the FAA passed Part 107. And that wrapped all of these converging factors into a legitimate regulatory framework where it was now possible to get licensed as a pilot and to fly in the federal airspace. And I believe this to be a generational paradigm shift where, as you have mentioned, there are an infinite number of verticals that can be applied to this technology. So I dabbled in it repeatedly over 4 decades, and it was incredibly difficult, very expensive, time-consuming. It was not ready for prime time. But now with these convergent factors, it really has democratized what was once only in the purview of government or large research consortia. And it's exploding. I mean, it's literally exploding as a new technology for every man in virtually every case.
I think that's amazing that you developed this from way back when, right? So this is one of those things where the concept was there, but the backing wasn't there as far as the technology and the supports and all the things. So you had the idea, but you couldn't really roll it out. And now all this stuff's coming down where the price points and the miniaturization and all the other things, and the regulatory agencies are coming into place and things like that. So I think that's great, and I think it's amazing. And I know we can see a lot when we look down on the Earth, right? It's a lot going on. I noticed you mentioned that you now know where all the gold is in the world, it sounds like. So I have to stay friends with you, I guess. So,
there was
kind of a nice thing to know.
There's something to that. There was a venture capitalist who tried to corner the market on satellite remote sensing data for satellites. I don't know how he did, but it's an exploding industry. What finally happened, just back to the story of Geomatics, is my co-founder, Thomas Gregory, was challenged by his sons to learn high tech. And he bought a drone, and he happened to be the vice president for a boots on the ground yellow iron construction company that cleans up hazardous waste sites. I happened to direct the cleanup of hazardous waste sites for Honeywell in a previous life. Mm-hmm. And he was showing me some of his drone imagery, and he was saying, my clients love this. They're up in Buffalo. They can't come down to the site. I put up some video and photography of the site, and they're like, oh my God, this is like the best thing since sliced bread. And I said, Tom, I used to do this. And I'm going to go do a little bit of homework about, where things stand with multispectral sensors and cameras and photogrammetry. And 2 weeks later, we had founded an LLC and we were off to the races. And yesterday was actually the 5th year of our operations.
No, I think that's fantastic. Recently I sold a piece of land and we went out, we took aerial photos, and I know the realtor took a drone out there, took pictures. But even for myself, it gave me a whole new perspective, right? When you're standing on the ground looking at a bunch of trees and bushes, it's kind of hard to really see. Even when you walk around it, it's really hard to figure out what's actually going on. But you start taking photos in addition to walking it, it really kind of makes everything make a lot more sense, which I can see. And I can actually see that big time when you're dealing with like a hazardous waste, or, you're trying to remediate and all these other things. So you got the technology in place, you put the LLC together. So what made you, think you had a market, right? What was the thing that said, hey, look, we got this great idea. So how did that next part, the market itself, match with your business idea, which is I can do all this great stuff? So what were the demand sides of this equation that kind of said, hey, this is time, we have the ability, and here's the people that are going to start using this stuff for us, right? So how did that all kind of come together?
So collectively, the owners of Geomatics have about 150 years of experience in hazardous waste remediation. So we had a very wide contact list, for lack of a better word, between civil engineering firms, environmental engineering firms, brownfields property developers, professional land surveyors, and we canvassed them, and there was just a ready need for this. All the way from, initial site assessment, as you did with your property, just flying the drone to help people see what's going on. But in the environmental remediation industry, there's something called all appropriate due diligence. And if you are buying a property and you do not pursue all appropriate inquiry, and you buy the property and you end up having a problem, you are liable. So there's this whole ASTM standard about pursuing all appropriate inquiry, which includes historic aerial photography review. Well, this adds a whole new aspect to that, because we can go out and fly the site tomorrow and not only give you great aerial photography, but infrared imagery, multi-spec. We can detect buried contamination. We can detect where vegetation is dying or dead. So you have all these multiple lines of evidence that factor into an experienced environmental engineer saying to their client, hey, we better go take a look at this. And another aspect is just the sheer cost of going out and drilling on a property. We did a site in the winter in the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts, something like 250 acres. And it was just a straight photo video. And the client, an environmental consultancy, called us up and said, you have no idea. First of all, the client absolutely loves this. He's already reimagining what he's going to do with the property. We love it because we showed it to our drilling company. And this is like mountainous terrain with forests and rivers and streams. And the driller said, you know how much time you saved yourself and money? Because we can look at these photos and video and map out where we're going to, route the rigs for minimal disturbance and not get stuck in a wetlands or whatever. And it's really helped them. It was worth its weight in gold. I mean, it more than paid for itself. And then when you get into the brownfields redevelopment, where you have finally taken a property through cleanup and you're now building a Amazon warehouse, you mentioned Jeff Bezos, or a tall steel and glass, you can actually monitor the construction progress with the same imagery.
Well, Chris, that was amazing walking us all through that. I mean, we're going to definitely dive deeper into those different aspects you just mentioned. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We're going to be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm Kurt Baker here with Chris French, the CEO of Geomatics. And he's been kind of walking us through how they got started. And essentially, you were in the environmental world, remediation and things like that. And you I guess you talked to a lot of your contacts out there in the engineering world, and you gave a great example, having a large piece of property, about 250 acres, where you can send up the drones and kind of take a look at everything, as opposed to, I mean, that would take forever to walk out there and drill and all this stuff, and a lot of time and a lot of money. It helps people make a lot of smart decisions much quicker. And another thing you pointed out was how you can identify areas may need a closer look. Because I mean, I've known people in the years gone by where they literally have a property that has a negative net worth, right? So, it's worth X, but the cost to remediate or rectify it is more than the value, and they're liable, and they're kind of stuck, So you talked a lot about that. And one of the things you mentioned was the brownfields, which I guess is kind of touching on that. You want to explain a little bit about what that is and why it's important for a buyer of a piece of property to understand a little bit about that before they kind of jump into something along those lines and get involved?
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, two aspects to that question. First of all, what is a brownfields? And especially here in New Jersey, we have 250, probably closer to 300 years of industrial legacy, right? And the way it used to work was those worthless wetlands out in the by the river were set aside for industry. And especially in New Jersey, there are huge tracts of land that are seriously contaminated still after all this time. I mean, I did a lot of Superfund cleanup in New Jersey. I remember driving down to DC with my newlywed wife, and it was practically every turnpike exit was named after a Superfund site, right?
Oh, no.
But what's happening right now is, there's such a need for land. And these properties are often at the intersection of all kinds of infrastructure, roads, rail, airports, and they're also in areas that do have a sensitive ecosystem that needs to be restored. And you can basically engineer with nature. You can take a property that's contaminated and you can build a remedy around what you see happening on that property and restore that property to beneficial reuse. So all of these tracts of land that lay fallow that are nothing but a fence, it used to be, the saying was pave and wave. There's a lot of incentive now at the highest levels of government to repurpose these properties. So where do we come in with, the drone technology? There's like 5 phases of remediation. There's the preliminary site assessment, the investigation, the feasibility study to examine remedial alternatives. Then you design the remedy, then you construct it, and then you do the monitoring and maintenance. And the drones work throughout. If you hire someone who knows what they're doing and they image your property at the earliest onset and create an ortho-rectified image, you can use that same baseline through the years, all the way through construction and redevelopment, and you can use all of the outputs to do your civil engineering, your stormwater, your grades, your volumes, your topography, in addition to being able to tell where the stressors are on the property.
Yeah, you mentioned, I wanted, if we could go a little bit into this. You mentioned ortho-rectified image, if you could explain like what that is. And I guess it might tie into what my next question would be is, I know your drones do have different capabilities, right? So, I mean, I know when I did it, it was just taking a picture and just so I could see what I had, right? But when you're doing things in a site where there might be some issues going on, you're probably taking more data points than just a photo, right? So if you could explain maybe what that term is, and then what different data you're doing and why that's important to know those different pieces.
Sure. So an ortho-rectified image is basically taking a collection of photographs and stitching them together and tying them to points on the ground. So take a wide-angle camera. If you look at the image from a wide-angle camera, there's distortion as you go out to the perimeter. That's called parallax error. Well, you have to tell the computer, hey, the lens thinks that that point is in XY space, but it's really in X minus 1, Y minus 1 space. So when you tie the imagery from the drone to set control points on the ground, you basically can bring it all into a true north-south oriented 2-scale map that's tied into the survey coordinate system, like the New Jersey State Plane Coordinate System. And this is incredibly important when you get into the world of professional land surveying and civil engineering.
No, that's fantastic. That's a great explanation. So what information are you taking when you send your drone up, depending on your clients? What kinds of things are they asking for, and why might it be important to gather that information?
Well, the simplest, obviously, is just straight photo and video. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, the next level of deliverable, especially for civil engineers and surveyors, is a photogrammetry solution, which is where you take thousands of photos of the site and you put them into the computer with these control points, and you create what's called a point cloud. And from that, which is incredibly accurate, it's like setting a stadia rod every 2 centimeters. Wow. A surveyor rod, it's just super accurate. So photogrammetry is the next level. And Interesting story about the development of photogrammetry we can get into at some other point. Beyond that, we use special cameras. So these sensors that see beyond what the naked eye can see. Everybody probably can think of like an infrared camera, right? The night vision, or, you see the infrared with the people walking around glowing in the dark. So that's a remote sensing device. It's seeing spectra in the heat range of radiation, and it's creating an image out of that. And then another technology is called multispectral, and that takes very discrete slices of the spectrum, blue, green, red, near infrared, infrared, the red edge for vegetation. And we have a camera that can take up to 10 slices. And I mentioned that you can slice, dice, multiply, subtract, add, divide, and create these classification schemas. So for example, we can take a picture of a property and classify it into water, soil, grass, shrubs, and trees. Or we can take a picture of the Sauerlands and count all of the ash trees that are dead or dying due to the emerald ash borer. And in fact,
I just have a quick question. You might be explaining this, but I want to make sure I'm understanding, because one of the things you talked about was how you're taking like the radiation range, and what are you picking up with that as far as information for me, right? So I see, okay, you got radiation range. That's great. Sounds good. Are we looking for, literally, radioactive material, or, we're looking for, and then you had something, you're really dividing up the colors very, very specifically. Well, I think, well, if I'm taking a photo, what am I, what's the difference between just taking a photo and drilling down and getting this, it sounds like much more accurate coloration, spectrum of what's out there. If you could just kind of tell us what you're learning from this information.
Sure. So, the science of remote sensing goes back 40 years. It's nothing new. It's just what used to be done on a satellite or a C-130 transport is now done under a drone. And for example, take the red edge spectrum and the infrared spectrum and the red spectrum. Well, it turns out that when you measure those in, say, a field of corn or a vineyard, you can tell how healthy the plants are by how they're absorbing or reflecting those spectra, because it's a measure of photosynthesis. Another example is if you're flying in the near coastal or streams and ponds and lakes, you can take the blue and green spectra and filter those and actually get an idea of what's under the water, obstructions, so long as it's not, opaque. Mm-hmm. And we've also used it to map groundwater upwelling into surface water, because groundwater and surface water have different temperatures, and you can actually see the temperature change where groundwater is infiltrating into surface water. So those are a few examples of where having these discrete spectra are very important versus just a high definition RGB color. And we have little tricks, we can take the RGB image and do things with it, but that would be getting into IP, and I'd have to have you sign a confidentiality agreement.
No, it's okay. No, that's really fascinating. We're gonna take a quick break again. You've been listening to Master Your Finances. We will be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm Kurt Baker, and I'm here with Chris French of Geomatics, and we've been talking a little bit about his high-tech drones that he's out there using, and he figured out the market about 40 years ago, and now the tech has caught up with him, so he's able to go out and do this. So can you tell us a little bit about, now that you have this thing developed and you got all this great stuff and the great data, how are people like using it in real life out there, so to speak? Can you give us some examples of how it's working out there in the field?
Sure, and I'm not going to, step on Jeff Bezos' feet, but I'll talk about what we do. So we've already talked about the environmental, civil engineering professional land surveyor clients and what we do for them. But another big area where this technology is just a game changer is construction and build out of properties. So what you're getting with a drone, drones don't lie. The images don't lie. You're getting a date stamped, auditable product. And our construction supervisors love it. They call us, hey, we're at stage 2, we're about to do our form work. Can you come out and capture the state of the site so that we have an auditable image that we can put to document that we crossed the T's and dotted the I's. And these projects can go on 18, 24, 36 months. And it's really just a super tool for the people that are managing the redevelopment. So there's one example. Completely different example, solar power. So solar power is getting really, really big. In fact, we just flew the newest and largest solar farm in New Jersey, which happened to be one of the most infamous Superfund sites in New Jersey. And it's now a huge solar farm. We were brought in before they did the siting study, during the construction. And then we were brought in with our infrared cameras to image the solar panels after they were powered up and tell them which switch boxes and which panels were failing. Because electrical resistance means it's failing and resistance turns into heat. And when you fly an active solar panel array, you can just tell immediately. I mean, it saves so much. They used to have to send technicians around and plug in an instrument and measure it, and then the input and the output, and it took days and weeks. We did it in like a couple of days. And it gave us very actionable analytics in terms of exactly how much megawattage you're losing. So if you're, managing a solar power and you've, no longer on the gravy train of some state, stipend, and you've got to make the thing work, and you've got to answer to your state shareholders, you want to do this, because I'll tell you, the cost of doing this is next to nothing, and the cost that you recover is return on investment on this is over 300% or far more than that. I guarantee it. Another area where we're getting just an incredible amount of traction, and you're probably, if you start searching on invasive aquatic species or the emerald ash borer or toxic algae, so these multispectral cameras can be used, and we are using them, for example, for companies that are stewards of our water resources, that have water reservoirs, that the water goes into a treatment plant and it becomes drinking water. So with global warming, I hate to bring that up, but hey, it's a real thing. And with nutrient runoff and heating of the water, you're getting a lot of invasive species, be it the European water chestnut or blue-green algae. Well, we can fly these reservoirs in a day, and in a matter of hours give you a very precise picture of exactly where that lake is being impacted by invasive species. Now, how did they used to do it? They used to have their environmental scientist or their intern hop into a canoe or kayak and paddle around 450 acres of water and try to map this damn stuff. Well, we can do it in hours. It's a total game changer, and we do it multiple times a year to help them manage this precious resource. And another example, golf courses. So golf courses use a huge amount of water. They apply pesticides, they apply nutrients, and they're under a lot of pressure to show that they're managing things sustainably. Well, we just flew a golf course that's being brought back online. And in a matter of hours, we were able to show them where 110 ash trees were dead or dying. literally in a matter of hours. And we were able to image their fairways and greens and show them where the vegetation needed water or nutrients. It used to be that they would hire a groundskeeper, again, walk 200, 500 acres, take notes, maybe not take notes. And this technology, we can actually put it on a cell phone, the true imagery with the results showing where the spectra are indicating distress. And the groundskeeper can have that on their cell phone. And as they're walking across the property, they can see where they're entering areas that have distressed vegetation live.
That's amazing. And I'm sure that gets into learning about how to design, right? If they have an irrigation system and they're finding out maybe it's a little too wet here, maybe it's not getting, because I mean, you have, elevations and all kinds of other aspects that happen. But when they lay it out, they probably just say, let's just cover the whole area, but it may not necessarily be the most efficient way to do it. I'm sure they're probably learning things about the design of some of these systems that you're surveying, right? I would think.
Absolutely. I mean, you can't manage what you can't measure.
Right.
And, I mean, you can even just take the whole golf course and then do an area assessment of the distressed areas, and you can immediately prioritize the worst case areas and tackle them first, right?
Right. Yeah, that's great.
So it's just a phenomenal technology. Let me think of another one. So utility and corridor mapping. So you heard about all the forest fires out west and PG&E declaring bankruptcy, right? Because the power lines are in forested areas. A tree branch falls over the power line, it catches fire and burns down the state of Rhode Island. No joke, in Oregon, there's a fire the size of the state of Rhode Island right now. So what we have been hired to do by electric utilities is fly their power lines and tell them where is their vegetation encroaching on the power lines. And secondly, where are wetlands so that we don't get fined by the regulators when we drive out to fix things.
Wow.
And that is a huge industry right now. I think PG&E at one point probably corralled about 45% of all of the licensed FAA Part 107 pilots a few years back to fly all of the utility lines. And it goes on. I mean, cell towers, anything.
So you touched on the forest fires. I don't know if this might be an area you can help with that, because I know that one of the things that they talk about is how, if they don't do nature burns the forest every once in a while, right? But then if they don't ever do any burning and they wait 50, 60, 80 years, then when the burn happens, it kills the trees because now the fire is way too hot. Now, is that something you can see from the air? If you go out, can you tell how much dead vegetation might be on the ground, and maybe how serious the issue is getting to be, and maybe when to most effectively go in and say, hey, I think it's building up and we want to take care of this in the near future, and so that it doesn't get worse, and so that when there is a fire, then it's much more dangerous, right? That seems to be what's happening in California. When these fires finally hit, they're so intense that you're losing neighborhoods and things like that, and it's not good for the environment or the people that are there.
Yeah, I mean, the size of the forests, I mean, this brings up a really interesting point. So people are really using satellites on almost a global scale to map old growth and determine where there's stress. That's at the satellite level. Okay. Drones come in, I call it low and slow. So we're getting in and we can image the leaf. They're getting in and imaging 30 square meters. So where the small unmanned aerial systems come in as on very specific case studies, or if a fire is just starting, launching a drone with an infrared sensor and determining where the hotspots are. But you must, and I know there's a lot of kind-hearted people out there with drones that want to help in a hurricane or a tornado or a forest fire. Don't do it unless you are directly contracted by the government to do this, because when you fly your drone, you're flying it in the same airspace that a plane might be flying to drop flame retardant. Right? And you could kill people. And a lot of people don't realize there's a whole emergency management system in place with very strict regulations about how drone providers fit in. And it even goes so far as FEMA reimbursement, Anyways, that's a whole different story, but very good.
No, question. I think it's absolutely important to point out, because you're right. I mean, Good Samaritans come out, they think they're helping when actually they're really getting in the way, and that's a little bit dangerous for everybody. We're going to take another quick break. You're listening to Master Your Finances. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Master Your Finances. I'm Kurt Baker here with Chris French, the CEO of Geomatics, and talking about some great examples about how these drones are helping with things everywhere from construction sites, contractors, to firefighters, and all kinds of different ways that having a kind of an eye in the sky, so to speak, and a close in that's a more detailed than the satellite image, right? You're closer, and you can get a lot more detail and really kind of help a lot from the environmental perspective, as well as from, a construction perspective and things like that. Just a lot of great things going on. So do you want to tell us a little bit about the background of how, the history of this whole industry, which I think is pretty cool?
Yeah. Well, if people were to ask, where did photogrammetry begin? Most people might say, oh, well, that's easy, when they put cameras on hot air balloons during World War I and floated them over the enemy trenches and hoped that the pilot got back okay when the wind shifted, right? But actually, the first instance of photogrammetry was when General Hayden in 1867 was dispatched to Yellowstone to do a geologic and natural resource survey. And they had the very earliest camera technology: glass plates, heavy tripods, giant box cameras, nasty chemicals. And what they did was just amazing, because they figured out, or other people at the time figured out, that if you take two pictures of the same thing with a slightly different aspect and you combine them with two lenses, you can get a 3D image. So these guys created these 3D images of Yellowstone, came back, and they did something really, really smart. They gave these special little wooden stereo viewers, which you can still buy at swap meets. It's a little tiny wood thing with two lenses. Next time you are at a swap meet, you'll probably see one. So they gave those and images to the most powerful and influential senators and congressmen. And with that, they were able to convince Congress to establish the first national park. And this is where imagery, a picture is worth 1,000 words. There are times when you simply cannot convey a concept without an image, is so important. And to us, especially today in this visual world. Now, during World War II is when photogrammetry really became an industry. And in fact, right in your backyard, Princeton University, they established the very first government industry consortia solely dedicated to analyzing photographs for war. So they would fly the beaches of Omaha or Iwo Jima, and they would send those images back to Princeton. And this whole army of photogrammeters would create these 3D maps and give out these stereo pairs to the intelligence officers in the field. And what was amazing about that was this was a huge opener for women. The brightest, most mathematically inclined women in the country were drafted to join this photogrammetry group. And it opened up a whole new area of inclusion for women at a time when the war effort was really doing the same thing in construction with Rosie the Riveter. Well, here, very huge thinkers. I mean, some of the best minds in the country were brought to bear on this issue of how to do aerial photogrammetry.
Mm.
So today, I mentioned, we have this great democratization where it used to be you had to be in the federal government or in a huge research consortia to do this kind of stuff. Well, just about anybody can buy a drone and pass the FAA 107 license, but then they need to be really, really smart about how they fly their sites, how they post-process the imagery, because just like anything else, garbage in, garbage out. But it's a huge opportunity for people. I network all the time with former car mechanics, people that their primary focus in life is deer hunting, but they can use geographic information systems, and they've learned about drones and aerial photography and photogrammetry, and they're actually making a living doing this. So it's a huge enabler across a very broad spectrum of capabilities. Now, you're not going to go make $1 million, believe me, buying a drone and taking pictures of pretty real estate. But it opens up a whole avenue for especially young people coming into college that might choose to take a drone program. It will open up to them the vistas of civil engineering and land surveying, remote sensing, geographic information systems, geospatial analysis, machine learning, artificial intelligence for young people that are fascinated with photography and computers and imaging and modeling and coding. This is the cat's meow.
So these family drones that we're selling out there, and people are buying, and they're practicing in their backyards, taking pictures of the dog running around and things like that. I guess there is some training going on. I guess a lot like the video games, right? There are skill sets that you're learning through some of these things that are not considered overly useful. They're kind of cool to look at, but and things like that. So what are some of the rules that are coming out now? Because I know that's been kind of a top of conversation. You mentioned the licensing and things like that, and I know, they're talking about how you can only take them in certain places because you're mainly going on private property, right? So you got to the private property and things like that. But do you have any insight as to what's going on as far as, we mentioned Bezos once or twice. I mean, like, if he wants to run them down my street, is that going to be cool? I heard one where they're going to like literally park at the end of your street, and the drones are going to come out of the van, and they're going to go and drop all the packages off at the different houses, and the drones are all going to come back, and then the truck's going to drive off. So, they're not even going to come to your front door anymore.
Let me touch upon a couple of the rules that might be hurdles to Mr. Bezos, and I'm sure that he will find any measure of ways to overcome them. But the Part 107 regulations stipulate you can't fly over people. You can't fly over moving cars. You can't fly the drone beyond visual line of sight. And you can't fly in restricted airspace. Now, there are ways to meet those criteria. But at the end of the day, the limit under Part 107 is a 55-pound payload. Well, if a 55-pound payload drops out of the sky, even if you're wearing a hard hat, I'm sorry, but and especially if that drone is moving at 40 kilometers an hour and has a failure and starts spinning out of control, and you have no idea what the vector of impact is going to be. So they're very carefully proceeding with ways to make them safe. Emergency parachutes that deploy, styrofoam fixed wings that, won't have a hard impact. We're kind of staying on the straight and narrow for our little business case right now, but we're watching all of that, and all of the Fortune 50 corporate sharks, for lack of a better word, they're circling. They're circling the Federal Aviation Administration and trying to devise regulations that their technology can be used to address. And I do firmly believe that Jeff Bezos will at some point, even though rumors are circulating this week that the Amazon drone unit is collapsing. And I think that's very unfortunate because let's face it, with all the road congestion and traffic, I mean, hell, every third vehicle I see around Pennington is an Amazon delivery vehicle, right?
Right.
So I think this is a necessary condition for our future society, but there are challenges to really make it safe that have yet to be overcome. Beyond visual line of sight is a very important regulation to come to grips with, because if you can deploy a drone to not fly 2 kilometers of an electric power line corridor through the Ozarks, but 300 kilometers in one go, think of all the lives that you might save, the infrastructure, the property, that might be saved by handing those results to the local power cooperative and not making them spend a boatload of money on manned intrusion into the wilderness to map their power lines, right? So there's a lot of good. You just need to do it safely.
Yeah, Chris, this has been an amazing conversation. Any last thoughts before we leave today? You've been fantastic.
Well, I mean, I am amazed that I first got into this when I was in high school, and here in my last 10 years of my life, I've come full circle back to what I love. And it's kind of an example of sticking with it and keeping on top of something that, even if it doesn't work out for you at the beginning of your career, something to come back to at the end. And I do really recommend that people getting into high school or a community college, at least, or even parents who have inquisitive youngsters. We did a nature reserve a while back, and we were in the parking lot, and all these families with their young kids pulled up and got out of the car with the baby carriages and the strollers and the toddlers. And we were like a bigger magnet than a candy store. I mean, these kids were coming over and what's that? Oh, that's really cool. And then the parents were jumping on it, say, yeah, you ought to look into that. And there are certain counties in New Jersey where they are actually now, Atlantic County comes to mind, they're actually starting to bring into the elementary, middle, and high school concepts around drones and unmanned aerial systems, and partnering with Embry-Riddle and the local Atlantic Cape May Community College and the state university system to really build out this industry. So I think it's a great opportunity for people. You're not going to make $1 million. It's really hard to do it right, but it's incredibly rewarding for those of you that are just starting to look at a career opportunity.
Well, Chris, thanks again. Really appreciate it. You've been listening to Master Your Finances. You can subscribe to this podcast and all of our podcasts by going to masteryourfinances.us. Remember, together we can master your finances so you can enjoy financial peace of mind.
That was this week's episode of Master Your Finances with Kurt Baker, Certified Financial Planner Professional. Tune in every Sunday at 9 a.m. to expand your knowledge in building and managing your wealth. Missed an episode? No worries. You can subscribe to a free weekly episode of Master Your Finances to listen to on your favorite podcasting platform. Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever. Master Your Finances is underwritten in part by Certified Wealth Management and Investment and Rider University. Rider offers continuing studies programs for adults who need flexibility. Want to add new skills to your resume? Take a continuing studies course at Rider University.